to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today I would like to share with you the tips that I have while making this big, beautiful quilt. The quilt is 64 inches by 76 inches, so it's a nice, big quilt, and it does have a lot of beautiful colors, and it does celebrate our love of sewing. We have that nice big sewing machine and these spools. So today I'd like to share with you how I stayed organized while I was making this quilt. Now the pattern is a free pattern, so you're going to be able to get that from Riley Blake, so you're going to be able to follow along. And if you don't want to make a big quilt like this, you can make a couple of spools or maybe just the sewing machine and turn them into pillows. So the free pattern is from Riley Blake, and it's called Heart to Sew. And the fabric that I'm going to use is called Dainty Daisy. So it has little dots, little daisies, and some beautiful colors. For this pattern, we are going to be able to use a 10-inch pack of fabric, and we will need some additional fabrics, and that's all in the pattern. But to cut these 10-inch fabrics, I do have a tip that I would like to share with you on how to maximize our fabrics. When we go through those cutting directions, what I like to do is cut out the cutting part, and then I'll take those little cutouts and put them with the fabric. So I know that is going to be cut with those directions, with those, that very cute background fabric. This is going to be my backing fabric. And for those 10-inch packs, what I like to do is draw myself a guide. So the pattern has me take out 26 of these 10-inch pieces, and then it tells me how to cut them. But what I like to do is draw myself a little grid, and that way I can rearrange that grid to maximize my fabric. I need two 2-inch squares, and those are labeled A. I need 2 pieces of B, 1.5 by 5.5, so I have those 2 pieces. I have 1.5 by 3.5 inches, those are C, and I have D, and those are 1.25 inch pieces, so I know they're going to fit in this space. Then as I continue reading down, I need 52 2-inch by 7.5 inches, and I need to have 2 matching ones. So I do want to make sure that they fit. So this is the layout on how I'm going to be able to cut this. I'm going to be able to cut my 1.5 inch strips, subcut them, cut a 2-inch strip, cut my 2 2-inch squares, and then subcut. And I'm going to be able to continue down. The pattern does have us take out some of the white 10-inch squares, and we're going to need 5 of them. And I have figured that I can get 12 2-inch by 3.5 inch pieces from each of my 10-inch squares. So in this case, I'm going to be able to cut one line off going in one direction and then subcut them going this way. But this gives me a really good opportunity to rearrange things and see how they go. So let me show you how this layout is going to work out. So you can cut them 1 at a time, 2 at a time, however many you'd like to cut comfortably will be fine. As I do cut, I can just at a glance make sure that my measurements are right. So for that first row, I do have a little bit left over, exactly as my diagram. So that diagram now matches the cut pieces. So I'm going to cut all 26 pieces in this way. So between my little diagram and with that page cut up with all of my cut pieces, I'm done. I've taken all of those stacks and have matched them up so that all of the colors are in the same order. This is a great way of getting organized and to get started. We can also keep organized as we are sewing our pieces together. When we look at the pattern, the first thing that we are going to do is make half of the heart of that spool of thread. When we turn it over, we're going to finish it. I read following those directions until I come to a point which I think is a good point to stop. And I'm going to lay out those pieces. So when we look at the pattern, I have the two D's, the H, and the A, which I'm going to sew together using a stitch and flip method. So that's going to take care of this little area. To continue, I'm doing the same, but on the other side. Once this heart's put together, I have my B's and my C's. So I'm going to take time and put all of my fabrics all in the same order. Then I could take this board to my sewing machine and I'm going to be able to sew one piece right after another. I'm going to keep them in order, put them back down, sew the next piece, one piece after another, all in order. So by starting with them in order, keeping them in order, it's going to speed up the sewing. Yes, it takes more time to organize it this way, but it saves a lot of time in the long run because we're not having to try to find pieces as we're going along, and it's going to make sure that all the pieces match up. So I'm going to follow the directions and do that stitch and flip, and then I'm going to be able to go to the next step. We now have all of those little heart blocks done. This is the center of that little spool. Now we're going to make the spool top and the bottom. And we're going to use our E-strips. We're going to put some corners on this to give it a spool shape, and we're going to do that with the stitch and flip method. And when we do that, we're going to get this shape, and that is going to go on the top and the bottom. And then we're going to need some double B's on the side. So I'm going to take my E's and my little EEs and stitch and flip them on the side to do those spools. And then I'm going to be able to divide up that pile of the BBs and sew them on. So I'm going to put these on my board, finish those spool caps, and then put it back onto the board. The spool caps are the same way, we just need to twist them. So I sewed those sides on, and I now will sew the top and bottom. And when the spool caps are done, I'm going to be able to add on Y and Z on the top and the bottom, and this is going to equal a big 10.5-inch block. All of the 10.5-inch spool blocks are now done. The same way as we put the spools together, we're going to put the sewing machine together. So I've just followed step by step until I get to an area that I can stop, or an area that won't fit on my board anymore. By laying out these pieces in advance, before we sew them, it gives us a good opportunity to make sure that those pieces are going to fit right and that we like the way this is going to look. I'm still following step by step when I get to the sewing machine, but I do like to lay them out first. That way I have my right letters in the right spot. So I'm going to pick this up to the machine and sew my machine together. That nice big machine is now done, and we're going to start doing the sashing border. The first sashing border is going to go around the sewing machine, and then the directions have us make a little Dresden plate to go on the machine. I'm going to skip that Dresden plate directions and do all of the quilt and decide how I want to do that after. So we're going to have some white sashing around that sewing machine, and then we're going to make some nice big star sashing for the rest of the quilt. For the sashing rows, we are going to make 18 that only have that 2-piece corner on, and then 27 are going to have double corners. So we have all of the parts, or what I like to call the components, ready to put the quilt on. When we look at the pattern, they do have us putting this together in rows. So we are going to sew the sashing on the one row and then do a long row in between. So we end up with that one row and then a thin row in between, another large row and a thin row. Now that is a great system, but I like to do it just a little bit different. I like to put mine together in squares. So I'm going to add a piece of sashing on each side in that cornerstone. So that is one unit. That is the second unit. 3 and 4. This last piece will only have one piece on the bottom. So the next row, it's the same thing. And I will draw myself a little picture right here on that diagram. Once those are done, then I can sew those rows together. So that is going to skip having to sew that long strip together and sew it in between rows. Either way will work out fine. Once we get that entire quilt done, the last thing will be adding that nice big border. However you sew those blocks together, it really is a fun quilt. That border really does add to it. And if you like color, this is definitely a fun project to do. Those fabrics do look like solids from a distance, but they do have the little polka dots and the little flowers on them. This quilt is 64 by 76 inches, so it is a big quilt, so I do find that I need to be organized right from the very beginning, from the pressing, the cutting, laying out all of those little pieces, making those components, and then putting them all together. I find when I do more organization before I hit the sewing machines, it is a quicker sewing period for me. It's less stress, and it's a lot more fun. I'll put a link in the description to the pattern called Heart to Sew from Riley Blake, and I do hope you even make one of these little spools. They are really a lot of fun to make. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. And be sure to make every day a Sewtacular day. Bye for now.